What's going on, Bridging the Gap?
Hey, Bridging the Gap.
It is Roger.
And Cheryl.
And, guys, I almost forgot that we had not completed Israel. In our last video, we talked about Jacob becoming Israel. But he's not fully become Israel because at that point in the Bible, he only had 11 children. So in this video, we're going to wrap up the nation of Israel because there's still one more child to be born, which is Benjamin. So we're just going to read a couple of chapters of scripture, verses of scripture. We're going to pick up where we left off. We left off at chapter 35, verse 13, and we're going to pick up at verse 14 and read
20
to 20. Yeah, 6 verses.
Okay. So Jacob set up a memorial stone in the place where he had spoken with him, a memorial stone, and he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil on it, and Jacob named the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. Then they journeyed on from Bethel, but when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe difficulties in her labor. And when she was suffering severe difficulties in her labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for you have another son." And it came about, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a memorial stone over her grave, that is the memorial stone of Rachel's grave to this day.
So, it says, so Jacob set up a memorial stone in the place where he had spoken with him, and a memorial stone. He poured out a drink offering. Let's talk about that a little bit. I think we mentioned to you guys that this is a custom that is still played out all over Africa. The drink offering is not something you drink. It's actually pouring out drink in honor of something. And it's something we still do here in the States. If you've heard the phrase, "you pour out a little something for the homies," it's literally pouring out liquor. When we were there, we saw this ceremony in a couple different villages with a couple different chiefs. Were having different ceremonies, and they would pour out liquor. Literally had to pick up liquor to make sure there was something to give for a drink offering. It was interesting, but those traditions are things that we still carry out today in the United States of America. Gang members right now. Dude in the gang gets shot, they're going to pour a little something out for the homies. Have no idea where that comes from. It's crazy. So that's interesting in this chapter. And we're just going to have a brief discussion because that's really all we wanted to cover in the scripture today before we move forward. But that was one interesting thing. The next interesting thing, I think, is the place where he did this. He set up this altar and poured out this drink offering was Bethel, which is now today Bethlehem. This was the creation of Jesus' birthplace in this passage of scripture, which I think is interesting. The next thing I think is interesting is Rachel passing. And there's a couple things that stand out to me in regards to her passing away, giving birth to Jacob's last child. First is what Cheryl mentioned in that video when we talked about this, these women battling over this man and trying to be of value to him by giving him children. The reason he had the 2 maidservants because Rachel felt she didn't feel she had any worth. So she gave her maidservant. Then her sister gave her maidservant. Everybody battling to give him babies. Could that be that she kind of set her own destiny? Like that was my purpose. And now that I've given you this last child, that's it. It's over. Because that was your focus. That's all you were focused on. It seemed like their whole marriage was about which one of these women was more valuable, by which babies they could give him, and she died giving him his last child. Is that what you were here for? Is the question. The other thing that stands out is when they left Laban's house, her father's house. Rachel was the one who stole the gods of Laban, who took that idol, sat on it, pretended she was on her menstrual cycle, so he never found it. But she brought idols into the camp of Israel. I'm not sure which one of those has some significance in her actually passing away, but I know that her focus on just being a childbearer, um, I think like Cheryl said, we see these generational things play out. We still see it today. Women battling over a man is crazy to me. But I think probably more significant is you brought another God into the house of Israel, and that's a problem. So, the last thing I wanted to point out in this chapter is if you go down to the very end, the last two verses kind of detail that Isaac passes away at the end of this chapter, and Esau and Jacob bury their father. This whole story about Jacob and Esau started with Isaac feeling like I'm getting too old and it's time for me to bless y'all because I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here. Y'all realize how much time has transpired? Jacob has been run out to Laban's house, served 7 years for Leah, 7 years for Rachel, got both of them, continued in service to Laban, had 12 different children, had come home. All of this has transpired before Isaac ever passed away. I just find it interesting that this all started with him feeling like he was gonna die soon. Guess we just don't know. But with that, we'll pick it up from there. We just had to complete Israel because it ain't Israel without Benjamin.
All 12.
Gotta have all 12 tribes. So this is where we got Benjamin, and ultimately this is where we lost Rachel. And this is where we got the birthplace of the Messiah. All in this one chapter. Interesting stuff. All right, guys. We'll catch you next week.
Bye.